right, welcome to Attribution Time. We have Raja back for part 2 or round 2 or whatever you want to go at it. This one's more of a heated topic, which I'm really excited about. As we were talking before the session, we just kind of got into like, where's the state of marketing attribution? You're on the side of consulting and you're working with different clients and things of that sort. And so I think you have a really interesting perspective and hopefully resonates with a lot of those that are practitioners of what do we do with this. But I'll let you take it away. Where do you think the state of marketing attribution, what are you kind of seeing with the different customers that you have at G&W Consulting?
Yeah, man. Obviously, thanks for having me back. I know I kind of reached out and said, hey, let's have a conversation about it. But it's really interesting because like when attribution first was released, and it's the stage of strategy in marketing, just like account-based marketing just got released. Very, very cool strategy. Everyone wants to try to implement it. And I think attribution took on that same kind of role. So everyone's at multi-touch attribution. That's where we want to be. We want to attribute it sources. We want to look at what activities. We want to attribute middle touches. We started, creating models, first touch, last touch, custom models. And now it's almost like it's come to a point where just like account-based marketing is looked at and has these different cascading effects of like one-to-one or one-to-many, it's almost attribution is multi-touch attribution very specifically is turning into like a gimmick, like it's implementation that people are doing without fully understanding, A, are we ready for it? And B, do we have all of the technical platforms or understand what our customer lifecycle and journey is? I'm personally seeing things where we're trying to attribute something that we shouldn't attribute at all. Like, let's say if it's you're sending an email to 100,000 people, the action is so so transactional, but we want to try to attribute it. And I think it's what I'm seeing is that companies are now saying before we implement attribution and this multi-touch attribution methodology, let's at least go back to, or let's at least figure out what the last touch is, which is really funny because before multi-touch attribution tools existed, that's exactly what people did, right? So when we talk about marketing as a pendulum, I think nowadays we've gotten so deep down the rabbit hole of figuring out attribution and trying to attribute everything, even though it's not needed, right? Multi-touch attribution is revenue related to activities that are happening, and those activities have to be meaningful, and that's the key word, right? Yeah. But now it's such a broad topic, and so many people are trying to implement it. They're trying to funnel all of these activities. Now a lot of the leadership is like, well, do we think they're not seeing the benefit? They're not seeing the result in it because it's gotten so far off of what it originally was impactful conversations that we want to attribute and give credit to. And I think now people are like, well, let's just figure out what last touch is. And I'm like, that's exactly what we were doing before you and I even started, before you started at the multi-touch attribution phase of your life, that now people are just reverting back. So now the pendulum is just going back to, let me just see the last thing that they did, because that's the one that converted them. I don't even care about anything else.
So when you say last touch, is the customer going to last touch of marketing touch? Is it because
a last engagement? Let's just say last engagement, last recorded thing that helped someone move past whatever stage they are in their customer journey.
Because I think that's where multi-touch began to get traction, was because when people got really sophisticated about what was that last engagement, and it started moving away from marketing efforts and it started moving closer to sales efforts. Marketing's like, well, we know we've been doing a bunch of stuff, right? We know it's not just what sales is doing. And so they they first started building all these things inside of a Marketo to say, well, we can associate back to this. And that's where this evolution of multi-touch attribution took place, was because last touch wasn't sustainable because it just continued to go that way. Now, on the other side, that you have the silos, which I was kind of curious if that's what you were seeing or not, whereas sales has it and marketing has it, and the last touch goes to marketing. Sales can attribute to what they're doing and they're working all day, because that's a little bit easier.
Or vice versa, right? Like the last recorded touch could change we're talking about Marketo measure very specifically, you know, we could do a marketing touch, an op could get created, the last touch prior to the op get created could be a web visit, and all of a sudden it correlates to last touch, right? So when we're talking last touch, we're talking last in, or when I say last touch, I'm talking last engagement that is an impactful touch. We're not talking someone going in and opening an opportunity or them visiting a web page, right? Multi-touch attribution did solve for that, but it's almost like now we've fed so much data into it that it's oversimplifying and over creating touch points that, like, you cannot tie a web visit in between a marketing qualified lead and all of the activities that happen in middle touches from an op being created. You cannot say the last thing was a web visit and that's what helped them. Like, it's just impossible, right? And when you start looking back and looking at the data set, those micro activities, and like, so sometimes we'll filter them out, we'll take them into like a, you know, data consolidation tool, like a, you know, did I say Power BI or Domo or some
Yeah,
sort
you
of,
can say whatever you want.
yeah. So some sort of like analytics, not an attribution tool, but a data consolidation tool like Domo or Tableau, and then we'll actually now we're picking those out, because you cannot, in my opinion, you cannot justify a web visit to have X amount of revenue and count it as a middle touch or a last touch just because that activity happened, right? So now what we're doing is we're taking this data and we're essentially not creating certain touch points. Like, you know, like in the Marketo world, in the marketing automation world, when we talk about vanity metrics, we talk about opens and clicks. Now we're talking about revenue association, op creation, qualified leads. Attribution is the same way. What are the vanity metrics for attribution? Web visits, email clicks, sent emails, right? I've seen people pretty much say, hey, we're sending an email to 100,000 people. We want to create a touch point for that. And this is very specific, a Marketo measure / visible reference. And the idea is why? You're the one doing the action. And multi-touch attribution, to me, like you said, is almost we're receiving this data, and this data is being put on this path, and we are seeing what are the impactful points. But now I feel like we're feeding the beast too much.
Why?
The point now
why are customers doing that? Why do you think,
so,
or what's your feeling on that?
I think it's the idea to give the model, and I'm going to say this verbatim because I've heard this a million freaking times. We want to give it as much data as it can and see what it can tell us. And in my opinion, that is not the correct way. Impactful touch points are very, very different. Just like vanity metrics are very, very different from, did this campaign generate revenue or did we hit our goal for this campaign from a marketing automation perspective? So now it's almost like explaining, hey, just because you get 10,000 web visits doesn't mean every single one of those web visits has an impactful conversation or is an impactful conversation related to attribution. You have to pull that data out, or you have to ease back on it. Not every website visit means that is an impactful statement. It is not. It could not even be a middle touch in certain cases, because that concept of someone going to your website or clicking a link in your email is just transactional. Just like vanity metrics are transactional. It's the outcome of performing a marketing initiative. Someone visiting your website, you sending an email, them clicking a link in an email is an outcome of a transaction. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're saying. That's the biggest thing that we're telling our clients is like, let's not make this, for lack of better term, like, let's not make this overly complex, because everything doesn't need to be in there. It is the things that we want to measure, right? Those are the ones that we want. And I think that's where marketing attribution in the current state is almost turning into a gimmicky strategy. And that's why you've seen a lot of blogs about it. You're not your podcast, but a lot of a lot of other podcasts talk about multi-touch attribution without really realizing that, or saying that it's the customer journey from anonymous to either qualified or closed. And the most important part is relationship to revenue for all of those things.
Yeah, one way that I'm kind of thinking about this, and for the listener, hopefully it also helps. And tell me if I'm wrong on this, Raj, but you have there's also specific funnel metrics within attribution to kind of process through. And so you mentioned a few different times where I'm thinking, okay, well, if the email click, this transaction that's happening there because you sent them something, an action took place, how should we measure that? And in my mind, if I go a little bit deeper, well, where is this person? Is this a new deal? Is this an upsell? Is like what is the process in this? So even within multi-touch, I think to reiterate, let's see everything that it captures, but then there's no slicing of the data of saying, well, here's our new customers, here's our existing customers, here's it's just it all kind of rolls into like one lump sum of data, and that's not good statistical analysis by any means because all that data is not truly equal, right? They're different types of accounts, they're different forms of engagements.
And they're different parts of the journey. They're different stages in the entire engagement model that individuals have with companies, just in a nutshell, right? One of the things that we've started to do is when we look at historic data inside Visible and Marketo Measure, we look at historic data with a lot of bias because we don't have behavioral, we don't have activity transacted on it, but we look at it from the aspect of let's see what all the recorded touches can be, but let's not incorporate data so far because the buying cycle this year for Marketo Measure has changed from January to now. What is the idea of a closed one opportunity a year ago compared to 2 years? Visible goes back, we're talking specifically Visible here, it goes back 2 years worth of data, but what does that have to tell you about today? AI didn't exist back then, right? Like there was all these technologies didn't exist back then. So we try to
Well, and
consolidate.
Visible's a great example. Sorry to cut you off, but Visible's a great example. In the last 5 years, the amount of acceleration, right? Small company, how you sold deals, got absorbed by Marketo and you were there for a year, how you sold deals. Now you're a Marketo Measure within a large ecosystem of Adobe. How do you sell deals? The information 5 years ago is not applicable to how you sell deals and how you run and
I
how
would
you
say
do
even
things
two
now.
years ago. I would
Well,
say
even
even
2 years
2 years
ago,
ago.
but
Yeah.
just the lineage of that the journey of the company itself. So yeah, you have to think of like your strategies can change year to year. It could change every 2 years or whatever it may be. But those things, as that shifts and as you're trying to adjust to the market, the data in which you have and how you approached attribution then is not necessarily how you approach it now. That's a good
And
call.
even that, even from a company centric perspective, right? Like even what you said, like Marketo, like Visible became absorbed by Marketo, absorbed by Adobe, turned into Marketo Measure. It's a very company centric model. The company has a product that it's selling. Let me flip that on you, and let's talk about how people used to buy Visible, aka Marketo Measure. To this day, I have to say both of them. I just can't say one.
Yeah.
Uh, how did people purchase Visible from a prospect? We look at a custom model, we look at all the activities and middle touches, right? They're completely different than currently now, right? And the same thing goes for any company, right? Like when we talk about multi-touch attribution, we always say best practice is revisit the model 6 months. And that generally doesn't happen. Like I'm not sure how many
No.
times you ran into it. No
Yeah.
one has revisited 6 months, right? So if we're saying we're revisiting the model 6 months, the reason we're revisiting it is because the buying journey changes. The buying journey's changed today as it was from last year, right? From quarter one to quarter two. Budget changes, right? So if we want to say that multi-touch attribution is something that you need to invest in, then what are the results that you're going to get? Not we're allocating $200,000 to web visits, because once you get that data, are you going to use the platform or the tool anymore? No, because within a 90-day window, let's just say 6 months maximum from a product perspective, okay, I know where my sources are coming from. That remains unchanged. Now, why do I need the product?
Yeah.
And that's a hard sell, but and the reason it's a hard sell is because that data from what we've done, from what we've seen, when we, you know, take that data out and tabulate it somewhere else, those those touches, once again, the best way I can find a relationship to modern day multi-touch attribution is just like we make the delineation between vanity metrics inside marketing automation and actual revenue associated to campaigns. Same thing with multi-touch attribution is we have to start parsing out what is vanity metrics touch points, like vanity touch points, right? Like whatever we want, whatever phrase we want to make up and call it. I'm pretty sure someone can do it. I call them vanity touch points because it's just easier.
Yeah, I think that's I haven't heard that within attribution, marketing attribution, but that is what it is. I mean, you're calling it for really what its face value is vanity metrics.
Or vanity touch points.
Or vanity touch points. Yes. Sorry. You mentioned that the customer wants to ingest everything in there, and let's see what happens, right? And it sounds like from what you just said, the customer's approach to implementing a product where it can collect a lot of data is let's collect it all, but then they don't actually go back and reevaluate after 6 months.
Yeah, because the idea behind that is to collect the data, create your trends, create your forward analysis, whatever that you want, and then fix the product to collect the analysis that's working. However, there's so many visible instances that we've seen that when we dive into it, people will be creating touch points based off on sent, open, clicked, converted, right? And those are 4 touch points for the same email. Completely irrelevant, right? If you're going to incorporate email, then you have to look at the final results. Like if the purpose of the email was for them to fill out a form or for them to move to a stage, we're using Marketo language here very specifically, but if someone is converted or if program is success, that should be the touch points that you're created, because prior to all of those things, those are just trends. Like people have to open the email to click it. They have to be sent the email to open it. Like those are all just transactional things that occur. And that's the data that we're seeing. And that data, I will tell you right now, is not worth your time. Like it is. Those are just things that people do. It's just like taking a step by step by step. Like those are just things that have to occur for the next thing to happen.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's a good call out with email specifically. It put UTMs on your emails, capture that data through your web and the cookie that you have, and don't do it from a programmatic standpoint, right? If your email has a point of success, which is filling out the form or driving them to a piece of content, that's going to get captured if you have a attribution tool that has a cookie that's able to capture web engagement. But even then, it can still end up being vanity attribution or a vanity touch point, because
a blog about the top 10 reasons on why is not something that I think you can tie it to the channel of content and engagement. But I want to say like a good 85% of the time, well, if I want to be accurate, I think 72 for this one client, 72% of the time, it's just correlated to a web activity, right? It's not being correlated to content because there's no conversion point or tracking.
Yeah, that's a great distinction point. When we talk about these tools, whatever you're using, more often than not, you have 2 forms of metrics. You have a touch point or engagement or whatever, and then you actually have something that is associated to revenue. Now, within Marketo measure world or visible world, we call that a buyer touch point and a buyer attribution touch point. And there's a great distinction between those two, and they serve 2 very distinct purposes, which is what you just called out. And I think that's a really key point. Both of them are very good things to have and to measure, but one is, I kind of talk about like that. One is what you keep close to your heart as a marketer, which is kind of the buyer touch points. What is driving engagement? What's doing this? The buyer attribution, or something that is associated to revenue, that is what you're trying to figure out. How do we communicate this to our, to our executives? How do we start actually reporting on it from that perspective?
And one step deeper in the current market and day-to-day things, those BTs and BATs, buyer touch points and buyer attribution touch points, they have those touch points have to be very in order for multi-touch attribution to be successful, those touch points have to be pretty definitive.
Mhm.
Web visits, and I keep going back to web visits is because this is a project that we're currently working on right now, is web visit can get middle touches, it can get last touch, it can get converted touch. There's such a array of how much revenue a web visit is associated with that at this point, once you start going up to the executives and you present a dashboard and you say, by the way, we generated $3.5 million on web visits, and you're just like, why that? What? Just having a website is generating 3.5 million, right? It's a hard because it's hard to sell that, and it's hard to believe it and say it when you're presenting it to a board of executives that web visits are your top touch just because there's so many of them. There's nothing else to take its spot, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's why the parsing of data, and even like when you create touch points, make sure you're creating touch points on specific pages, or stripping out like the primary website, whatever. There's ways and methods to do it. I believe um, those conversations are a lot easier to have with the executive team than really just putting up a dashboard that says, yes, webinars attributed to a bajillion dollars worth of data, web visits, and Google. Like that's it. Like you're telling me like those top four sources are what everyone's using? No, it's just the product is the product. Configuring the product to your needs, that's very crucial because you can't go in and just set it up anymore, just like with marketing automation, right? Everyone got marketing automation. The lead score was 100 threshold. You got marketing qualified. You passed to the scales and passed to the sales, and they moved down lead status, contact, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Like you have that funnel, and that was a copy and paste on how we did implementations back in the day.
Yeah.
Multi-touch attribution in the current phase is going to through that same cycle of
Yeah.
we're taking touch points based off on best practices, implementing it across the guidelines across the board, and people are saying this is a waste of our time, right? And it's because everyone doesn't have 100-point lead score threshold. Everyone's buying time frame is different. Everyone's allocation on one of our clients, we reduced the time through filters and suppression rules because their buying time frame is so long, or sometimes the buying time frame is so short, to only give attribution to touch points that are within a window of an opportunity being created. So when an op is created, we don't take 2 years worth of data. We only say within, I think it was 180 days or 60 days or 90 days, I only want to see those touch points within that window to attribute it associally. You can't tell me that a web visit in 2020 should get a middle touch credit for a deal that closed in
Right.
2022, right? Like, so
That's right.
yeah, right. So it's suppressing, it's suppressing data points and really like diving into those details. That's where multi-touch attribution helps. And now the
That's
reason
right.
we're seeing people saying, okay, multi-touch attribution is cool. It's really nice to have. What was the last impactful thing that they did? What is the one that resonated the most for them to move on to the journey? So it's almost like the pendulum's going right back to where last touch, to your point, originally was just whatever they were doing. Now it resulted into multi-touch. We're talking about impactful touch points. And now it's saying, it's almost like a hybrid. It's like, I don't want to know the last touch. I want to know the most impactful thing that resulted in them moving to the next stage that
Yeah.
isn't a web visit, that isn't a sales activity, that isn't a task or an event being created, which is the bane of my existence at this point, is those
Yeah.
activities being created and overshadowing web activity or a marketing activity. And so yeah, and I think that's where it's headed. Right? I think in order to have these tools, you have to really dive into suppressions, segmentations, look at your buying journey, look at your buying time frame, and only allocate touch points that are associated within a window, rather than, by the way, we have 2 years worth of data. This is what it's saying to us.
Yeah. I don't think first touch and last touch will ever really go away. I think it's
Oh, yeah.
basic marketing metrics. They're always going to be there. What I'm hearing a bit is the rub that is occurring where marketers are buying a tool that is really a data tool, not a marketing tool. And so and this is Ian, right? This is speculative,
Yeah.
but what happens in this is you have someone who's marketing operations, very savvy in how to understand campaign and structure and UTMs. But when rubber hits the road, you need to be data centric, data minded to be able to say, hey, like you just said, I only want to track 180 days after the opportunity is closed. I need to reduce, or I need to remove web visits from these pages because of this. There's all these additional pieces from a data perspective that says right now we're creating a ton of data, but it's not good data. And from an attribution perspective, that's causing a lot of tension. And so they're going back to what they know, what they can report on. And now they have all the data to say what is meaningful, right? That's not just the last recorded thing in Marketo, but it is, we have enough data to say what was meaningful enough. But there's a little bit of rub there. And I think it's a simple plug of Ian here, but that's why I really press for teams to have a dedicated person for attribution, or grab a data person to be on the marketing team to focus on all of that and ingesting that and processing that, which is what it sounds like G&W is doing for their customers. But I think that's where a lot of that gets lost.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think one step kind of more to that as well is that you need someone now that also understands the sales cycle, right? If you don't have that and you have a marketing operations or a data person, they're just going to be kind of guesstimating on what marketing activities need to be allocated. But it doesn't have to be a salesperson, doesn't have to be a sales leader, but someone who understands the sales funnel, they can specifically say, hey, our average buying time frame is 6 months, it's 12 months, it's 3 months, it's 2 months, whatever it is. So we want to now narrow and laser focus what are they doing inside that time period from an allocation perspective. That's the attribution touch point.
Mm-hmm.
From a touch point, from a BT perspective, that's broader than the 90 and 180 days. Those are
Absolutely.
all of the things that they've done. We are only going to say these last things in these time periods. Those are the ones that should get either the bulk of the credit or the activities that we will generally look at.
Yeah, it's well said. Yeah, it sounds like it's kind of more of that revenue operations mindset where you understand sales, you understand these processes, the sales cycle, but you also have a understanding of operations, data hygiene, data cleanliness. So, well, Raja, thanks so much. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say even customer success, right? Like even client success and how customers for existing businesses, like what is the differentiation between the custom model as it associated to segments of the business versus new and existing? Because existing business that you're trying to upsell has a completely different completely different touch points. So not even visible touch points, but completely different model. And associating those, and what we've been able to do is we've carved it out. But we have to be able to look at it, like carve out like the existing, because they don't have that much BT touch points. Like they're not going to have those visible touch points a lot. And even if they do, they're irrelevant because they're already a client, right? They've already gone through your funnel. So at that point, for existing business, it's really the attribution touch points and associated to the next opportunity or the next phase. That's what's more impactful. And that's what makes more sense. But once again, across the board, even if it's a new business or existing business, the idea behind multi-touch attribution is this whole encompassing customer journey from start to finish across the board. And unfortunately, I just don't think that's viable anymore on how we're presenting to C-levels. Like when we're reporting to C-levels, like no, there was a point in time where people thought a 26% open rate was amazing. And you presented that to the C-level and they said, that's awesome. We bumped up our open rates from 17% to 26 and people were clapping. And now we're doing the same thing now with attribution. They're like, I don't believe that. Like, where's the data? So like, and it's the same thing. Like, that's why we got away from vanity metrics in marketing automation. And the reason we have to get away from vanity touch points from an attribution standpoint is because of those same reasons. We cannot answer it intelligently and cohesively enough for people to say, yes, that makes sense. It did when it first started because we didn't know any better.
No one knew any better. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
brand new. It was well, and it's sold that way. I don't care who you are. When you're
Yeah.
selling an attribution tool, you're saying, hey, you can track from beginning to end. And that's not reality. And we all know that, but I still think you're better off understanding and being able to see the data, even if you can't see everything. It's just when it's sold as if you can see everything, there's that buy-in, and then now we're calling BS on it. A lot of people are just saying, well, this, we need to clean this up. So I think that's a good call out. Well, Raja, thanks for the time today on Attribution Time. I really enjoyed this conversation and hearing your thoughts on it. And I know others will as well. So thanks for being on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me back.